Hi everybody, welcome to Sprague Woodturning. My name is Jim. So this week we're going to do some roughing out. So we're going to take logs and turn them into bowl blanks and get them ready for the lathe. Along with that, we're also going to be using my oval cutting cookie rig. I've got a bunch of walnut that I want to process with that. And we're going to be working on some maple, walnut, a little bit of locust, and there's actually some butternut as well. There might be some other stuff in there too. So, you know, that's what we want to do. It's starting to get hot here and the bugs are starting to come out. So I want to get this stuff processed before basically you get eaten alive when you're outside working. So that's the main reason for it, and before it gets too hot. All right, so what we're going to do is move outside, and I'll show you exactly what I want to do in this video and the next video. So what you're looking at here is 3 walnut logs, and what we're going to do for the most part with all of these is put them up on the oval cookie cutting rig, which I still have to set up, but I'll show you kind of briefly how that gets set up. Along with that, we've got some butternut here. This was a yard tree that died and had to come down. Unfortunately, it is just cracked really bad. 2 butt pieces here will definitely yield some bowl blanks for sure. 4 to 8, probably be able to core some of that as well. I don't know, we'll have to pick through this to see if there's anything there that we're going to be able to use, but kind of on the smaller side. Really wide growth rings on it too. I don't know if the camera's picking that up or not. And along with that, here's a pine burl, and if you've subscribed to my channel, you've seen are pine burls worth buying or not. So what we will probably do, this could be a spruce one too. We'll slice this burl in half and see what it looks like, but if it's full of pitch, we'll have to pass on it. This is a big walnut burl, and along with the burl, hopefully we're going to be able to get at least 4 to 6 bowl blanks out of the trunk of the tree that the burl is attached to. That's a big old gnarly piece of maple burl. I believe this is walnut, and while you may look at that and say, well, what are you going to do with that? I mean, this here is an awesome resin casting piece. It just doesn't get any better than this. So all I'll probably do is just cut this up into sections and then dry it as it is, and then that way we'll be able to make vases with it and this kind of stuff. This is actually a big pile of maple. This is probably 2 years old now, but there are some really large crotch pieces in here, so we'll certainly get at those. There's another big crotch piece right here. Anyway, there's lots of stuff to do here. This is actually a catalpa burl, something that you don't see too much of, but most of this maple is going to be firewood. Might be able to put some of it on the cookie cutting rig, but we'll have to see. The other thing, now that of course I'm doing resin casting, this is a purple sand cherry. This was a tree that was on our yard and it died, so we decided to cut it out and take it down. I'm going to cut pieces, you know, like this size, maybe different sizes, and that way we can bundle them all up and make vases with this. And this is a burning bush that died on us as well, so I'll be doing the same thing with that. But before we do any of this stuff, let's get this cookie cutting rig set up and running, and we'll get this walnut cut up today at least, and then we'll move on to the other stuff probably tomorrow. All right, so the way this works is that's a battery pack. This is actually the line for the winch. This is the winch that goes on to my log trailer, and I've just got a set of vice grips holding it down below. I don't know, that's all I need. All the pressure is up this way, so that's not really a big deal. The line comes up over a pulley, and it's supposed to be on that pulley, but it isn't, and then it goes down onto the rig. But yeah, all you need is just a simple little battery booster pack like you see here, and this thing works great. So in a perfect world, the logs would be laying out in front of the rig, and what you would do is roll them on to the rig, and they would just sit in that little cradle there. And then once you've got the log on to the rig, you would lift it, and then I still have to hook up the chainsaw rig, and it's like a chop saw. I'll do that next, but I thought I would just kind of show that it's been almost 3 years since I've used this. It isn't level. That's another thing. It would be probably best if it was level. I just yanked it out of the corner over there because it's too hard to shoot anything back in there. But ideally the logs would be out in front of this, and then you would put this down. If this had weight on it, it would naturally go down. There are 3 lifting points so that it lifts evenly. And yeah, I mean, it's not, when we made this, it actually worked out better than I thought it was going to. So, you know, what I'll do is I'll get a log up on here, and then we'll lift this and then set up the chop saw attachment. So when I started my professional wood turning career, I had no intentions of ever doing cutting boards. And then my wife said, no, you know, you should add some variety to your booth when you're at these juried art shows. And like, yeah, I get that. But, you know, you go to any of these woodworking shows and there's usually about, you know, 1,000 people doing cutting boards. So one of the things that I did to make myself different from them was to make these oval cutting boards that we're going to see here shortly. And along with that, I was fractal burning them. And those two things, again, to make it in the arts and crafts world at these shows, you need to be different from others. So that's basically where this came from. And along with that, people that I would meet, they would say, hey, I've got a tree, I'm taking it down, do you want it? And if it was something that was desirable to me, then I would certainly go and get it. But a lot of times you end up with a lot of this smaller wood that for the most part was firewood. So I decided to make this rig along with my 2 sons, and I'm really glad that I did. This really helped with my bottom line when I was at shows, and I'm able to use the whole tree and not see parts of it go to firewood. I think before I cut up this log, I'll actually cut this crotch piece out of here. Should be some nice figure in here. The smart thing would have been to cut this off prior to putting it up on the rig. I wouldn't have had so much issues with it, but you know, sometimes I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. You know what I mean. All right, let's set up the chop saw piece. All right, so here is the saw mounted in the rig. And like I said, it works just like a chop saw. This is a custom mount that I made. This was off of an original, if you wanted to say cut 2x4s, you use this mount. And anyway, I adapted it. The welding on this isn't exactly the greatest, but you know what? I don't think it's going anywhere. And you can adjust this way with the bolts on the side. Now, usually I've got it all the way over. This gives me about an inch and a half, or sorry, an inch and a quarter space through here is what I'm looking for. And yeah, this is a 28-inch blade, or 20-inch bar, I should say. And I'm using a 365 Husqvarna, and absolutely awesome saw. I don't think you can get this model anymore, but I really like this model. Anyway, we're going to advance the log and start cutting some nice boards up here. So I started this video where I've already kind of got the pieces cut off so that they're the right angle, along with the fine adjustment with the bolts that are on the mount on the side. You can also pivot the the base where the saw is attached to, like you would a chop saw sitting on your bench. So it took quite a bit to fine tune this and to get it to kind of where it is. There are a few things that I want to change on this in the future, and I definitely want to weld some supports underneath of the final section here. So at this stage, I'd already cut a few boards off. Just kind of, if you cut the log on an angle before you put it on the rig too, that'll save you about 3 or 4 cuts. When this thing is dialed in, it really works well. It had been so long since I used it that, you know, I forgot to actually do some things, and one of them is the chain that's on the back of the log right now. Later on, I'll just use a short piece of chain and put a lag bolt in the very end of the log. That way it's not kind of bumped up in an angle. This here is a really not a good example to be cutting this piece on here because it's got some knot grow overs and it's kind of difficult to work with. So, you know, a lot of times when I'm using this and it's sitting on the rack, then I'll take a few sacrificial pieces so that I know that I can get the log to sit down in the rack properly, and then just advance it forward. And you know, when this thing is up and running good, you could probably cut a couple hundred of these cutting boards a day. So, you know, they've been quite popular at the show, and I know that I've taken the fractal burning off my channel, and there was just too much negativity directed towards it, so I decided to take it off my channel. But that's basically what I do with all of these cutting boards that I make. Well, not all of them, but I would say probably 80% of them will end up getting fractal burnt. And of course, now they'll get some resin in them too. So where the saw mounts onto the rig itself, there's 4 adjustment bolts. Well, they're basically lockdown bolts, but you can actually unscrew them and screw ones in order for the bar to line up properly with the stop. Along with that, that entire base will swing left and right as well. With this being a 28-inch bar on it, Husqvarna, that was kind of the maximum length of bar that they recommended. I would have liked to have got maybe a 32-inch bar to fit on this. I think that it may have worked better because you would have been able to get longer boards. But you know, you don't want to basically overpower the saw either, even though this 365 has tons of power. And if you're curious, the 65 indicates the size of the motor, so it's a 65 cc motor. That's the way Husqvarna does it with the way that they've got their saws numbered. This is basically the view that I see. Sometimes I will pull it up tight against the stop, and then as the saw goes down through it, of course it kind of pinches, then I let it off, and then that way you're able to cut down through it. That there is a sacrificial piece so that the piece sits down in the cradle properly. The goal for me here is to make sure that these boards are within a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch in uniform thickness throughout it. If they are like that, typically they will dry without cracking. If you have a board that's kind of thick on one end and thin on the other, well, they're going to dry at different rates. So that's why it's important, even when it comes to turning your bowls, if you're a twice turn turner like I am, that there you have a uniform wall thickness throughout the piece. And the same thing applies when you're cutting boards as well. All right, so that is the first log. I got 18 cutting boards out of that. And I was hoping to get a little more, but that log is pretty much the largest diameter that I can work with. And It had little knot grow overs, so that was really kind of throwing things off. So, you know, that's still a decent profit. One log will yield, you know, 18 boards, and at 100 to 150 each when they're finished. That's not bad. This is a time lapse that I set up. I thought that I would do this just for curiosity's sake. Now, I took the little stop blocks out, so to lower the rig, and I'm like, why is this thing not going down? And I looked over and I'm like, oh yeah, I got to take that off. It's not going to go down with the support sticking up that the snatch block is attached to. So once that was down, I was able to flatten the rig. And then, like I said earlier, ideally these logs would be right out in front of it and you just roll it onto the rig and it's no big deal. It's a little bit of a hassle when they're sitting on the end like they were here. But what I do is I put a snatch block onto where the mount is for the chainsaw, and then you can pull it right onto the rig and then just, you know, manipulate the log like I am there and get it up onto the cradle, and that's it. Once it gets up, put the wooden supports back in and then take the pressure off of the winch. Install the metal piece where the snatch block will be attached to, and then that goes on to the end of the log. I think I was having issues with the metal support kicking out from underneath of it. And as you can see, there's a fair bit of strain on it. It's bending. That's a 4-inch C channel, if you're curious what that is. This piece here ended up, I had to cut a bunch of this off, and the reason for that is because there was a big long crack in it and I didn't see it until I took a bunch of the bark off, and I'm like, oh, that's no good, got to get rid of that. If you leave any splits in these logs prior to cutting them into boards, then you're going to have problems. And this one here, now that I've got the chain and the lag bolt in the end of this log, it's actually working a lot better. And this log itself is actually more designed for this type of rig because it has, it's more or less straight and it's flat without any knot grow overs and that kind of business. So if there are some people that are interested in maybe making something like this and have the skill to do so, the size of this rig is 10 feet long and 6.5 feet wide. I didn't really see the need to make it any bigger than that, especially the cost of steel. You can certainly put a longer log on the end of this. That's not really that big of a deal at all. The scissor uprights, they're 3 by 1.5 inch. I believe it's 1/8 inch steel, something like that. And the C channel or U channel, I'm not sure what it's called, C channel or U channel. It's 4 inch by 1.5 inch, and it's 1/4 inch thick, so it's pretty heavy duty stuff. So there's a fair bit of mass. You definitely don't want things moving around. So that's definitely a good thing. And I've actually had this in place with logs way out in front of me and winched them on with no problem at all. And the rig never even thought about moving. Things that I would do differently, the upright where the winch is mounted, I would make that at least another foot taller. That way the winch line is basically on a downward angle as opposed to an upward angle like it is now. Where the snatch block is mounted, that's what I'm referring to. And I would also make some sort of a latch that would go over top of the pulley where the back upright is, so that the winch line will stay in place and not keep popping out. That actually gets irritating after a while. But you know, literally this thing has probably, I don't know how many, probably 3,000 cutting boards this thing has made. So it's put a fair bit of money back in my pocket. And like I said earlier, you're able to use the whole tree. And that you know, instead of, you know, the thing is, people will say, well, you know, it's firewood as well, and that's saving money. Yeah, it is, but I can make about 20 cutting boards and then buy firewood. So it really doesn't make any sense to look at it that way. Anyway, it's a great thing, and I'm glad that we made it. And anyway, if you have any questions about it, you can send me an email, and I can try and give you some direction on it. But it's been a really good thing. So this is the next step. This is anchor seal. You've heard me say it a number of times here on the channel to get rid of the anchor seal before we do any casting. Well, this is going to keep the wood from cracking. Essentially, it is a liquid wax that dries clear. Because we're in a cold climate, we use the glycol formula. That way this doesn't freeze. Basically, this is an old paint tray. I dump it in there. And this is all I do to keep it from hardening up, is just put it in a bag, a roller, and it's still nice and pliable. Anyway, I'll dump a bunch in here. I'll put it on both sides of the board. And then once I get these all done, I'll show you the next step. The reason why wood cracks when it's green and it's drying is because the moisture is being released too quickly. By putting a product on here like Anchor Seal that's made by UC Coatings, it will slow that release of moisture gradually, and thus preventing the piece from cracking. Anchor Seal does say that you'll have less loss if you apply 2 coats. I've personally found that 1 coat is good. I should also mention that I did take the time and knock the bark off these. These are the ones from yesterday. That took, I don't know, it was actually fairly quick, maybe half hour or so. Since these have been around for a year and a half, there were bugs in the bark, but by removing it, you're not going to get any in your boards. Anyway, you get the idea. I'll bring it back when we're at the next step. So here we are inside of my drying shed. It's fairly cool in here compared to the outside environment. The shed kind of sits in the shade a little bit. And there are 61 boards total here. So that's pretty good yield out of the logs. They were fighting me. The rig was fighting me a little bit. I think that I probably got to get closer to 70. But regardless, they'll sit here for 6 months, and then I'll start rotating them through my fridge kiln, and they will be ready to be finished. When I want longer charcuterie boards, this is the way that I do it. I probably should have got out my bigger saw that's got a 42-inch bar on it. It would have been a lot easier to do these, but I didn't have a lot of them to do, so I figured it was okay to do it this way. I don't know how many times I knocked my camera over this week. It was terrible, actually. Anyway, I'm not the best at cutting these by hand, but that certainly is an option for those who don't want to spend a lot of money, especially now after the pandemic. Steel is very expensive. Anyway, this is another way around it. All right, so this is our first crotch piece, and wood turners really like these crotch pieces because, you know, there's a lot of nice figure inside of here. And the way that I'm going to cut this, here's the pith, the very center of the tree. I try and line up the upper one with the lower one. And if this was a really wide crotch piece, I'd maybe cut a strip out of here like so, getting rid of that pith area totally. But when it's a small piece like this, I generally just cut it down through the center, and then, you know, I get rid of the pith area when it's mounted on the lathe. So for the new wood turners, you may be wondering, well, why do I need to get rid of that? And the problem with leaving that pith in your work is that typically if wood's going to crack, it's going to crack through the pith area. And there's some beautiful crotch grain, and that's why wood turners really like these crotch pieces. If you can remove it, it is certainly best to do so. It's always not an option. Like in this case, like I said earlier, these aren't really wide pieces, so it's pretty hard to do that. But you can get some pretty phenomenal looking grain. All right, so next up is this walnut burl. As you can see, it's still on the trunk of the tree. Ideally, this is the way I like to get them. Problem is, this isn't even. Would have liked to seen this more out here. Then we would have been able to do a lot more with this piece. So I'm not exactly sure what we are going to be able to do with this. Yeah, it's too bad. Way needs to be like this to be even. But anyway, what we're going to do is free this from the trunk. I will cut it probably about here straight down. And then once we get that cut off, we'll be able to see what we can salvage out of the trunk of the tree as well. Anyway, I'm hoping you can pick that up. We got an ant's nest. Not a real surprise, to be honest with you. Yeah. So early indications on this burl are that it's definitely going to need resin. That is for sure. Might get more solid as we move into the piece, but all right. Have to stick this aside for now and encourage these ants to leave the premises. All right, so this is that big walnut piece. There's some decent cracks going across here, so I'm going to cut this on this side of the pith, and I'll probably take about an inch out of the center on this piece as the ants are still vacating the premises. And I don't know, we'll have to see what good it is. I'm going to cut this off here. That way, I've got a 20-inch bar on my chainsaw, so I don't like to go over that. I don't like to have the tip of the chainsaw buried into the wood. Yeah, I don't know. Once we cut this open, we'll see if it's salvageable or not. And I know that the lighting's probably not the best for you guys, but I don't know. This might be a lost cause, but we'll have to see. So I'm not going to harp on safety too much here. If you have chainsaw pants, or here I'm wearing chaps, you should definitely wear them. I wasn't too concerned about when the chainsaw was mounted in the log rig. There's not really much that can happen there. But anytime you're holding the chainsaw and cutting like I am here, typically accidents with a chainsaw in regards to cuts to your legs happen during limbing and operations such as this. So if you got them, you should wear them, and if you don't have them, you should get them. Well, that's a good sign. We'll be able to salvage a piece on this side anyway. That's good. I had to alter my cut because it wasn't lining up at all on the back side. Now, this isn't a wasted piece. You can get a cutting board out of each side of the pith here. So that's what I usually do. If you cut this, say 2 inches, 2.5 inches thick, then you've got a bunch of pepper mill blanks if that's what you want. Definitely want to get rid of these ants before I move any of these pieces into my workshop though. This one's probably going to stay out here for a while. And I don't know if it's even salvageable or not. We'll have to see. Might look cool with resin. Stick aside. Also got this piece of wood on the ground. That way your saw doesn't go into the dirt. You definitely don't want that to happen. Alright, so now that this is off of the actual trunk of the tree, you get a better look at it. I am going to trim this down a little more, especially now that I know that there's probably ants in it. So trim that down there. Probably leave this the same as it is there. Sometimes it's best to cut them off thick and then have a look at them. Really bummed out that this burl isn't more even, because this would have made a really, really cool nested set. So anyway, we'll have to figure out what we're going to do with that. Well, we definitely found out where the nest is. What a shame. I was so looking forward to this being a really cool burl. And it still may be, but only with resin now. All right. This is maple, and it looks to be a really decent sized burl from this side until you flip it around. And this here is just rotten, just falling apart. So this might be one of these pieces where you slice off pieces of it and then save them for casting at a later date, because really there's not much that can be done with this. I think that's what I will do. I think I will just slice. I'm going to trim this first on both ends and cut these two wings off, and then flip around and cut off this piece here, which I don't know, it might be solid. Probably got a lot of spalting in it too. All right, anyway, let's cut these off here, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do with the rest of this. It's a tough one though. Well, check that out. Pencil line spalting. Might have to hold on to these pieces and stabilize them. I still got lots of cactus juice, so she's a gnarly piece. But look at that spalting, pencil line spalting, different colors of spalting. Very cool. Here's the other one. Not real thick though. Very nice. All right, so I've been looking at this, and I think what I'm going to do is cut this right down the center. Yeah, there's a big void down in there, but I think that if we get one really large burl on the back side of this, that's going to be great. And then any of these pieces that are on the wings here, this one, and I don't know if there's anything salvageable on that side or not, but might be able to throw them in the casting bucket as well. I suspect that down inside of this piece there's going to be lots of spalting like this, so we really don't want to lose this. But great big void under there. I don't know. I'm definitely going to have to cut it on an angle to get anything out of it, really. Or come out quite a bit. Right about there or so. Well, what do you think of that? Yeah, it's really punky. I think it's savable. But that spalting is some pretty amazing looking stuff. Same thing on this side. Those burl pieces over there, we'll be able to save those. Don't know if we're going to be able to save any of this, even though when this is dry, when it's casted with resin, it looks pretty sharp. We'll have to see. All right, I think we should try this, do this catalpa burl next. As you can see, everything that I cut, I like to place on top of something, some waste blocks. That way, when you cut down through it, the chain doesn't go into the dirt, because sharpening the chainsaw really sucks and it takes away from production. And you'll also probably might have noticed that I'll set it up on a block that's got a V-groove cut in it to hold the piece as well. A lot of people may not be familiar with this. This is catalpa, northern catalpa. I've never seen a catalpa burl, so that's something new. But if you look at the kind of the color of the wood, it almost looks metallic. That's the one thing I like about it. Really light. Unfortunately, this piece here, it's pretty much just firewood. And this piece, the burl itself, well, that's probably going to need some resin to make anything with it, but in the end, it should be cool. All right, pretty soon we're going to be into these big crotch pieces. I might try and hand cut some of these long pieces into long cutting boards. Too small to do bowls with. This, unfortunately, has got some splits in it, so I don't know. We'll have to see how that goes. But, I mean, it's a double crotch. Should be some really nice figure. And there should be a big bowl blank in the bottom of this, too. Actually, let's cut this up next. This is locust. Haven't really done much with locust at all. There's another big crotch area down in there. One there, too. All right, let's cut that up, and then I think we'll call it a day for today. So this piece is the same as the other pieces. I like to, preferably when I'm processing this stuff, cut it back to good wood where there's no cracks. And then from there, like I said earlier, I've got a 20-inch bar on the saw. So, you know, ideally, you're going to be cutting anything no longer than 19 inches long. And then that way the tip of the saw isn't buried into the wood, because that's another area that you can get a kickback. So that's why I like to process blanks the way that I do. And along with that, cutting it down through that pith is probably the main thing that you're going for. Those pieces will be casting pieces. All right, it is the next day, and before we process this maple, I figure since the bucket is full on the tractor, we might as well go in and round these, and I'll briefly talk about my rounding jig that I made. The ants are gone out of the walnuts. I suspect they're probably now in my firewood pile, so I'll have to put out some ant baits to make sure that we get rid of them all. When we cut these open, we might see them again, but we'll have to see. But I just find it's easier to, the bucket's full, so why not go and round the stuff on the bandsaw now and get it ready for the lathe. All right, so if you haven't seen this before, I did shoot a video on this, the making of this, but essentially you put a hole in the bottom of the blank, and then you adjust this in and out until you get to the size that you want. I will show this as we go, but if you want to make something similar to this, there is a video on my channel, and if I think about it, I will link it in the description down below. So the easiest that I find to do this is to use these round templates like I've got. This is 16 inches in diameter, and it fits on here pretty close. And you know, I just center it on the blank. Have a look underneath to make sure that there's not going to be any issues that way. Find the center mark. Drill the corresponding hole. This actually just slides off of the circle jig. You can fit this into there. And then that way, put this upside down on the rig, and that's it. I should also mention that I've got this roller that I just set on the floor here. A feed roller, if you will. And then that way you can move the table in and out, and the roller supports it, and then the table, when you put heavy weight on it, doesn't tilt out. I never noticed it, but if you look at that previous clip, you'll see that the roller isn't sitting flat on the bottom side of the table. And that's because I've got the table tilted on the bandsaw so that the pieces I cut match the bucket, or the buckets that I use. I eventually correct that at the end or later on, but I was like, why? It's just something seemed off about it. And it's not really that big of a deal as long as you want it, the top surface that you're looking at, to be the top and not the bottom. But if it's vice versa, then you're going to have, it's going to be some issues. So anyway, watch out for that if you tilt your tables to match your casting buckets. And while I was at it, I figured I would go ahead and process the centerpiece that I cut out of that walnut, getting rid of that pith area and cutting off the bark area. I can guarantee you that there is going to be some sort of critter in the bark. So it's best to get rid of that so that you don't put that in your drying shed and then have it go into your other pieces of wood, because you definitely don't want to do that. All right, so we got our first kind of dilemma as to what to do here. This is some beautiful crotch figure. This is walnut. Problem is, if you go for the figure that's right here, well, it's going to be a really shallow bowl. You do have another knot coming out of it, so that's an issue. In this case, I'm probably going to just center this piece. So I could probably go larger than that. In this case, I think that I'm just going to go for the largest blank that I can get, because, if you go the other way, you're going to have a really shallow bowl, and, that's fine. But a lot of times I'm cutting for the size of the bowl. So, I mean, this will be interesting. It'll have certainly some crotch grain on one side of it. If this was an even crotch where the two halves of it were the same size, then it's not such a big deal. But in this case, and the other thing too is staying away from these cracks that are coming in here too. So that's another thing that you need to think about when you're cutting these crotch pieces. The other thing that I like to do, and this is preferably to get done before you use the bandsaw, because there's a lot of dirt in the bark. So that dirt, when you go to mount this piece on the lathe, is going to dull your tools, and it's also going to dull your bandsaw blade. In this case, it's actually on there pretty good, but I think I'm going to be able to get the majority of it off anyway. Of course, the only exception to that rule is if you're going to do a natural edge bowl, but these have sat around too long and there's no way that the bark will actually stay on, so best to remove it now. All right, so here is our progress so far. These will just get anchor seal on them, and then they'll go into my drying shed. These are going to be going on to the lathe. That's that maple 2 pieces down there. I'll just probably put some anchor seal on those and put them in the kiln as they are. This is some more of that locust. And this is actually, if you look at this piece, if you split it in half and then invert the pieces and then put resin down the center of it, there's another project. This I could probably put on the lathe, but I think I'm going to leave it as it is. This is that locust again. Weathered and beaten up as it is. That's the catalpa burl. Can't really do much with that. It's going to have to be dried as it is. And of course this big old walnut piece, that's going to have to be dried as it is as well. I failed to mention that along with, you know, I don't have a park brake for this tractor, so I can't lift the bucket in the summertime. In the wintertime, I've got a big blower unit on the back and I can put that down and it's going to stay where I want it to. It's probably not going to go anywhere, but I don't know. This stuff isn't real heavy except for that that walnut burl. It's not exactly light. But anyway, I'm going to just carry on processing this. I should also mention that the offcuts are being pushed into the wheelbarrow, and then that will go into my drying area. I burn wood in the workshop here for heat, and of course all of the bark and other compost material goes into the green bin. Everything gets used. All right, I'll finish these up and I'll probably bring it back for that burl when I do that, but other than that, we're getting there. Well, I thought our ant issue was gone, but I was wrong. Inside the burl, started digging around and there's this huge dirt pocket or whatever that used to be, and I tipped it over and knocked it on the floor and they just came flying out of there. So anyway, I've sprayed some ant be gone down on the floor here, so hopefully that will get rid of them. You definitely don't want the ants migrating to other pieces of wood, especially something like this that you plan on drying in the drying shed, all of these. So, you know, killing these critters before you actually put your wood in the drying shed is definitely what you want to do. Let's flip this over. Yep. Anything on there? Tree wreckers. I think I'll just scoop this up with the shovel and chuck it in the woods. Well, that's it for this load. This is that large maple burl, and it was so rotten up underneath it. When I put it on the pin, it just moved around. So I cut a bunch of pieces up out of it. It's kind of funny because in the past this would have been complete junk wood to me, but when this dries now, I'll be able to put this back together, throw some resin in, and this will make a very unique piece along with a lot of these other pieces. A lot of figurative grain in this along with the spalting, so it's going to be really cool to see what we make with these in the future. So there's that. This is actually probably both sides of that burl, if you remember. And of course those two pieces down there that we cut the ends off of. All right, I'll do a little bit of cleanup here, and then we'll get at that maple. All right, so this is the butternut. I actually forgot about this, and these two pieces were together. So that one was on top of this one. This was the butt end of the tree. As you can see, it's already starting to really crack quite bad. So I'll cut this back an inch or so just to get some fresh wood, maybe 2 inches. Unfortunately, on the other end, it's actually split quite bad too. I'll probably cut this back a couple of inches to good wood, and then I'll have to see what we're going to get. If I get a really large bowl blank out of here, the same thing on that side, and then hopefully a couple of smaller ones on this upper end, then that's really all you can do with this. So you hear me say that term, cutting back to good wood. The reason for that is if you process your blanks with cracks already in them, then there's a good chance that that crack will migrate, and then during the drying process you're going to lose that bowl or whatever it is. So if you've got the room to cut back to clean wood that doesn't have any cracks in it, it's best to do that. This piece here, actually the piece that's on the left side of this that I cut off, actually had an ant's nest in it as well. Tiny little ants, and I didn't see them at the time when I was processing all this. And the next day when I went out to the workshop and I was going to round the pieces on the bandsaw, and I picked it up, and here were, I don't know, probably about 60 tiny little ants and between the two pieces. I'm like, well, okay, I guess that's going on the burn pile as well. It had some dry rot in it too. Well, I was hoping for better yield than that from this butternut, but you know, this is really all we're going to get, I think. And even the stuff that we did get is not really all that great a shape. Split right there. You can see some down on that one as well. I've got more over there, but it's, you know, it's not going to be any better. It's going to be all the same. And these two pieces, all you're going to really be able to do is get maybe some peppermill blanks out of them. Disappointing. I thought that we'd be able to get more yield out of it, but the other part of the tree, there was a big dead section in it right here. So this is just really punky right here. So that is also in other parts of the tree. So I don't know, really, it's probably only good for firewood, and it's not even good firewood. All right, let's move on to the maple finally. All right, so this is the base off of that large crotch I just cut. And, you know, this poses a lot of issues. This is where the crotch actually started back here. So we're going to have to cut an inch out of this. And we'll still have a decent bowl blank on each side of it on this side. On the other side, there's a branch coming down here. This isn't the crotch, but there's a crack that runs like this, here and here. So by taking an inch out of here, we'll take out a lot of that crack, but we're still got a little bit to deal with. But that's what the thin CA glue's for. So when I'm cutting bowl blanks and I know that they're not going to be natural edge, you'll see me after this, well, it falls off when I put it back up. I'll cut on where the bottom side of the bowl is going to be. That way there's a flat spot there already before it goes on to the lathe, and they stack nicer too. Now after I lop off this little branch area here, I didn't see the need to cut an inch out of the center of this. It actually was pretty solid. The other thing when you're cutting crotches is typically the piece that's on the chainsaw side right now is going to be fatter than it is up at the top of the crotch section. So you'll see me cut off a little bit there, and the same thing on the other side. That way it's even. Well, it's not the best crotch grain I've ever seen, but you know, I think that it's going to make a pretty nice bowl. Here's that one. I'll get the other one. This stuff is actually really light. Yeah, again, double crotch, very nice grain. Maybe should have cut it off a little further down here to get some better figure. You never really know how deep these crotches are. This is that last crotch piece. I thought I would show you this because this obviously came from the crown of the tree, because it's got branches coming out from it everywhere. So you may ask yourself, you know, how do you cut this? And the way that I always do it is, if I have multiple branches coming out of a blank, I will always cut the two largest sections like you see here. That may be obvious, but some people may not fully understand that. But yeah, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that I can see hearts. All right, there's the last two. Whew. That's about it for me today. The bugs are bad. What is that bird? Does anybody know what that bird is? That one. I can never see what it is. Anyway, we'll see you tomorrow. So it's the next day, and I totally forgot that we were going to do this pine burl or this spruce burl. You might hear some shooting in the background here. The military base is about 3 kilometers as a crow flies that way, and there's a range, so that's what you're going to be hearing probably. They've been shooting all morning. This burl doesn't go all the way around. If it did, burls like this make great hollow forms. Mind you, this would be an absolutely massive one if that was the case. So, you know, it's missing underneath here. And I'm basically looking for a full burl, which I believe is going to be something like this when we cut this. And again, you know, I already shot a video on are pine burls worth it. Well, let's open this one up and see how much pitch is in it. I'm not too optimistic though. Well, surprisingly enough, this is about the hardest wood that we've actually cut up out here in the last few days. Doesn't look to have a ton of figure in it. I don't see a lot of pitch. Matter of fact, I see very little. So, you know, maybe we will give this a shot. It is pretty much perfectly shaped as a burl cap that you want. It's a little big here, but it's certainly the nicest burl that we've cut so far. Well, I don't know, maybe not. But anyway, there's that one. Here's the other one. You can tell there's some figure in there. It's fairly even as well. And there's the last one. Oh, I spoke too soon. See that? It's nothing but pitch. Pitch pocket. Anyway, we will we'll round them and then we'll make a decision from there. I know that we haven't talked much about bandsaw blades. I actually just got my order yesterday from R&D Bandsaws. And what I like to get, it's called a wood turner blade. And 1/2 inch, 3 teeth per inch. And it has a very wide kerf. So that way when you're cutting wet material, it just eats it up like crazy. And I pretty much use these blades to cut resin. Everything everything you see on this channel has been cut with these blades. I usually get them 5 at a time. If you're in the area, the Hamilton Woodworking Show, I guess they're going to be there. Hey, and if you do, tell them I sent you. I could always use another sponsor for my channel. So let them know that I sent you and tell them that I'm plugging them here, a free plug on YouTube for them. Along with that, I got some zero clearance table inserts. The one that was on there was like really bad. And what else did they send here? It's just some more catalog stuff. Anyway, there's 5 blades there. And if you're curious, for these 5 blades, my bandsaw takes 131.5 inches. And for these 5 blades, it was $189.05 with taxes and shipping included. R&D bandsaw blades, there's a link in the description. Check them out. A reason why you shouldn't let your wood basically sit around any longer than a year before processing it is these little critters here. I just took the bark. This is a maple crotch, and I just took the bark off of it, and they were underneath of it. There's more down there as well. So, you know, after a year, they're going to start boring into the wood, and then it's going to basically make your wood useless. So I don't know what these are. I don't know if they're longhorn beetle. They're wood boring beetle of some sort. Larvae, of course. But anyway, if you leave your stuff laying around, this is what you expect to find in it, or worse. I haven't mentioned it during this video, but it's always best to lower your guides like I did there. You'll get less wander with your blade in your bandsaw. A lot of times I'm leaving it up so that the camera has a better view of what I'm cutting. But it's always best to keep it as low as you can to the wood. You'll get a better cut. All right, so there's 23 blanks. We'll be able to core some of them. This plastic that you see, this is 6mm poly, and that will drop down over the face of these. I don't totally seal it off, but that will slow down the release of moisture and keep them from cracking until we can get them on the lathe and turned into bowls. I didn't show it, but this is another maple crotch. It actually might be one of the nicest one that we did in this video. And on the other side of my trailer, there was actually some pieces of walnut, so that's what this is. So, you know, all total, we might get maybe 50 bowls and tons of casting pieces, which is really the main thing that I'm going for now, to be quite honest with you. That's a cherry burl in the back there. It's we didn't have that in this video. It's been sitting around here for a while, but lots of stuff. I did hand cut some of these maple boards, so they're actually a lot larger than, longer than the other ones. So the other pieces of maple that were out there, that's what I'm going to do as much as I can. I can probably get maybe another 6 or so out of there. And then that's it. Next week, we'll be moving on and actually finish turning these on the lathe. All right, well, that's it for the video. It was great to be outside for a change instead of being locked up inside of the shop. This is the down and dirty aspect of wood turning. A lot of people have no concept of what it takes to get to, you know, have this pretty bowl sitting on your table. Well, a lot of work goes into it prior to that, and a lot of times I think that a lot of people when, especially at a show, they'll pick up a bowl and they go, "This is $300." Yeah, it's $300. It's a ton of work to get it to that stage to you holding it. So, you know, part of my channel is to educate people on the aspects of wood turning and why things cost the way they do. I really enjoy working outside and processing wood. My body doesn't anymore, but certainly my back and my hips don't like it anymore. But I really enjoy, there's nothing like cutting open the log and seeing what's inside of it, that beautiful grain. Most times, you know, you're just kind of like, it's all right. But a lot of times you open it up, it's fantastic. You're like, wow. I was really hoping that that walnut burl was going to come through, and then, yeah, it's just absolutely destroyed that. It will still be a nice looking piece with resin, but that wasn't really my intention with that piece. I wanted to make a nested set with it, but that's just not going to happen. Maybe later on with the resin we could do a nested set with it. All right, don't forget to put designer epoxy down in the comments, and that's for the 3-gallon giveaway. 3-gallon giveaway at 100,000 subscribers. And of course, by leaving a comment down below, you'll also be entered into my bowl draw at every 5,000. So the next one's at 95,000, and we're creeping up there. Next week we're going to be finishing these we're going to be roughing these out into roughed out bowls. That's the primary goal, and get things ready for the drying shed and for the 2 fridge kilns. All right, well, that's it. Take care, stay safe. Don't forget the bell. Please share my videos with your friends. And of course, that thumbs up will always help with the analytics. We'll see you next week.